of it's true. It's kind of a bit illusory, a bit misleading. Well, I think that everything on Google is feeding into agendas that are taking us away from ourselves and creating illusion, which stops people from understanding reality. So,
Yes.
um,
Well, hence why I Googled it, because I thought, well, if whatever the top results are coming out of Google, you know that's what the Matrix wants you to believe.
exactly.
That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's really good that you did that. That was quite intuitive of you because I'm going to kind of start with that anyway, kind of to bust the myth and the what people's sense of that is. Yeah. But this is kind of quite a compassionate perspective as well, because people are so down on narcissists, and like I think this is going to help people understand what that is and like how in pain actually those people are.
I'm
So
looking forward to it.
yeah, good.
Let me just I pinned that. Let me pin that. So everyone knows now that you're going live at 6. Although I've been pushing it out throughout the day. It's been a busy day today. We've had Gabby on. I had to do a pre-recorded show with Emily Jane this morning, but it's all good.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I'm glad to be back. I didn't like missing a week because because I'm somebody who like I struggle with self-discipline a bit, and I'm trying to find ways in my life to commit to myself and to make commitments generally. So co committing to doing this every week is brilliant for me, and I really enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. It's kind of like going in the direction of myself, like trying to bust the self-sabotage.
Self-healing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
Love it. Have you been up to anything sort of other than the normal stuff?
Well, I mean, I've been moving house, so it's kind of taken up my time. And then I had a nice weekend with my daughter, and yeah, I've been kind of just trying to settle and sort things out, really. It's been kind of like a very practical week rather than anything else. But yeah, the weather's been
Where
lovely
you
and
moved to, are you in a similar place as to where you were before, or is it completely different?
well, it's completely different because I want to move in the direction of community living because I've realized that chronic independence doesn't work for me. So I've moved from a place where I was just on my own with my daughter to a place where I'm kind of sharing with other people. So I feel like I've gone back a little bit to my student life, which,
So are you in the same house as these other people, or is it
yeah,
the
yeah,
house that you're in, or
yeah.
in the same community?
Well, I'm in a completely different place, but I'm sharing a house with other people instead of living on my own.
Ah, right,
Yeah,
got you. Right.
yeah. So it's a bit of a change,
Yeah.
but in the right direction for me, I think, because I'm trying to move from codependence into independence into interdependence. So it's kind of like leapfrogging from one to the other, because codependence and independence are an illusion in my opinion. And interdependence is when you trust and rely on other people and you're meeting their needs, they're meeting yours. So it's kind of, it's just a setup that works, in my opinion. And I think that we've all gone completely wrong by living in houses behind locked doors on our own. And
Yes.
that's great up to a point, but I think we need each other. So yeah.
There's a guy, you've probably heard of him and you're probably aware of it, but I'll ask anyway. Have you heard of Michael Tellinger's One Small Village project?
No, I haven't.
Ah, that's something you might want to look into.
Okay.
He's a South African guy. And don't let that put you off. He's a very nice man. But he has this concept of interdependent, exactly what you were talking about, but on a village scale.
Yeah.
So each village would produce items that would share with the next village, and they're, if they have too much of one thing, then they'll share it with the other villages.
Yeah.
And if each village did the same, then there's no need for money, there's no need for want, there's no need for desperation, because everybody's sharing everything with everybody else.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
I'll send you a link.
Yeah.
He's a very famous guy. Once you start, sort of, if you Google or YouTube Michael Tellinger,
I recognise the name, yeah.
He's been around for years. He's wrote a lot of books, but I'll send you some details on him and then you know.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
I'll let you crack on with your show. It's 6 o'clock, so I'll mute myself.
All right, thanks, Andy.
I know Tim's waving already. Hang on a second. You want what's book? There we go. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Tim and Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
Right,
Hi, Tim.
Over to you, Jen.
All right, thanks, Andy. All right, hello, everybody. So this is episode 4 of Feeling is Healing, and today we're going to be demystifying narcissism. So,
you press record.
Oh, it's a good job. It's a good job you're here, isn't it? Start recording. Oh yeah. And then it throws me because I've got to put the thingy in, the title. Okay. Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Feeling is Healing. This is episode 4, and my name's Jenny Luscombe, and today we're going to be demystifying narcissism. So this is quite a meaty topic, as I discovered this afternoon when I was making notes on it. And interestingly, Andy was saying before that he went on Google to see what they say about it. And we both agreed that the definition that you would look up online or in a dictionary even is probably feeding into one of the agendas that goes along with all the other millions and billions of agendas that are taking us away from ourselves. So kind of coming from the myth of narcissism, people think of this as somebody who's fallen in love with their own reflection, or somebody who gets gratification from their own attributes, kind of like an inflated ego or a pride thing. So this is actually very misleading, and it's almost polar in some ways to what is real. So I'm going to be presenting a kind of controversial look at narcissism because it comes from a compassionate perspective. So I always like to be truth in as many ways as I can. So it's misleading because self-hatred is probably closer to what is really going on for somebody who's narcissistic than self-love. So a bit later on, I'm going to be talking about the difference between self-love and selfishness. So narcissism's actually closer to self-hatred than self-love in reality. It's kind of like selfishness on steroids is more of a accurate description of what that is. So we've unfortunately been programmed to see self-love as kind of like a vanity or a pride, like definitely a negative thing, and that we should all be selfless. So selflessness is also an illusion, in my opinion. So most people that are listening to this podcast are probably not narcissistic. Most of us listening to this are probably more on the codependent side, but they're basically two sides of the same coin. And codependence is a form of narcissism, which most people didn't know. So codependence, which I covered sort of in the last episode, and narcissism are both coming from the same wound. And it's all to do with kind of how we were parented and then how we cope, what our coping mechanism is. So Narcissism isn't actually like a personality disorder or anything like that. It's not necessarily a static kind of unhealable way of being. The best way to look at it is it's an adaptive relationship strategy. So I would argue that, you know, looking at it that way, kind of selflessness is kind of feeding into the agenda that is taking us away from ourselves. You know, kind of we're being led into separation as opposed to unity. So selflessness, I think, is an illusion and doesn't really work. So the confusion between self-love and selfishness is really important to address. To understand narcissism, which is basically selfishness, we need to understand the difference between selfishness and self-love. So narcissism is happening when someone basically perceives an extreme lack of resources. For example, love. Love is going to be the main thing that they are finding it very difficult to find or to access. So if you think about self-love, this is, the definition of this would accurately be an affection for oneself. So a devotion to yourself. And I think that in order to truly live, only self-love works above everything else. So really, we must love ourselves. Otherwise, nothing else in our life is actually going to flow. And if we love ourselves, then from there, from that place, this love then overflows into the lives of other people. So you hear people talk about their cup being full. If we can fill our cups, if we can fill our own cups first, this then overflows into the lives of others. And then we've met our own needs first. And then this enables us to be unconditionally available for others to meet their needs from a place of abundance rather than lack. So there's self-love. A lot of us feel like we shouldn't be self-loving, we should be selfless. Now, this has come about as a result of the agendas. Selflessness is what most codependent people are doing. We're kind of giving ourselves up for someone else. So it doesn't really work. We need to be going in the direction of self-love. So selfishness, on the other hand, is a concern for one's own welfare with a total disregard for the needs of others. And it's not a natural state of being at all. It's a maladaptive relationship strategy, which comes from trauma and extreme lack. So the difference between selfishness and self-love is kind of like the Grand Canyon, really. And it's interesting how we've been led to believe that kind of the opposite is true. But, you know, we know, most people who are listening to this know that we're living in a very inverted way. So when somebody is narcissistic, this selfishness is happening because this person can't generate their own energy to meet their own needs. So their strategy has been to take from others as if their life depends on it. And actually their life does depend on it. This is the thing that is quite frightening about narcissism. So they are stuck in this pattern and they're constantly trying to fill a void within themselves by taking from the external world. So basically from other people. So you might have heard people refer to what they're looking for is supply. They're looking for supply from other people because they can't go within. So being around a person who is narcissistic is extremely uncomfortable, as I'm sure probably most of us know. So when somebody is taking and taking from you, the reaction that we have to that, eventually, it leads to extreme depletion. And people often find themselves very, very tired, like very fatigued. So narcissistic people, they just don't know how to love themselves. They don't know really how to create. And they need you to keep giving. So codependence and narcissism go hand in hand, because codependent people, with their selflessness, they give chronically. And if you don't meet the needs of that narcissistic person and you don't continue to give, they cannot function. And then if you withdraw your giving from them, they become extremely powerless, extremely angry, and very scared. So the best way and the most compassionate way of looking at this is that a narcissistic person is internally starving. There's an emotional starvation there. So expecting them not to take to get their needs met, which is what it's their only strategy, that would be like expecting a starving child to not steal food. So being on the receiving end of a narcissist it would be extremely difficult to get to that perspective. So this probably is, I probably should have done a trigger warning at the beginning of this, but I do tend to be a bit controversial sometimes. But this is a very real look at what's really going on. So if you see codependence on the one side and narcissism on the other side of a spectrum, which we're all on, we all have a narcissist within us. Like when things get really difficult for us, in an emergency situation, we naturally become selfish. We all do. And if we said we didn't, we would be lying. So on the codependent side, we're being selfless. We're basically self-sacrificing. We're giving ourselves up for someone else. So codependence and selflessness versus narcissism and selfishness. So we are, as codependents, giving in an extreme way. Narcissists are taking in an extreme way without doing the giving. So it isn't rocket science to kind of see that for a relationship to work, there needs to be equal give and take. There needs to be reciprocation. So both of these maladaptive relational patterns, they're both coming from the same trauma. They're both coming from a childhood wound of lack. And in terms of learning, codependent people and narcissistic people are a perfect match for each other, but it's not a relationship that can work. But in terms of learning and healing, we need each other. And unfortunately for all of us, we have to be in relationships in order to heal relationships. You can't heal relationships when you're outside of a relationship because you need the messages. So on both sides, the codependent and the narcissist, they both see love as limited and conditional, and that love can be used up and that there's not enough love to go around. So the codependent, selfless person, they surrender themselves. They can't give love to themselves because they believe there isn't enough love to go around. If they gave love to themselves, they'd feel like they were depriving other people. So just feel into that for a minute, because when I was reading this, I was thinking that's definitely what I have been in the past. I've definitely given to other people, and I haven't given to myself. And there's a subconscious belief there that you would be depriving other people if you gave love to yourself. And it just doesn't make sense to the logical mind, but that's what we do. So on the other side of things, the selfish person, the narcissistic person, they also believe in a lack of love. They're also not in alignment. So in alignment, love would be infinite. It would always be flowing. So on both sides, it's not flowing. So the narcissistic person, they can't feel a connection or an affinity with other people. So they think that they must take, otherwise they wouldn't be able to survive. So if we were all in alignment, we could never feel like someone could take so much from us that there would be nothing left, that there would be a deficit. Because in alignment, love is abundant. It just is. And you know, it might not feel like that to a lot of us, because we're all still healing. So For a narcissistic person to actually heal, they would have to move towards that themselves. We could never make a narcissistic person heal if they didn't want to do that. And actually, for a person who was truly narcissistic, they would be very unlikely to be able to own that and to go there. So this comes from a deeply repressed wound that has been repressed and suppressed so deeply that it's been forgotten, really. So there's a huge lack of acknowledgement from these kind of people that they could be narcissistic in the first place. They would never seek out information about narcissism, for example, because they just wouldn't go there. And the main reason for that is because there is deep shame, which most people who are involved with a narcissistic person in a relationship, so this could be your boss, your friend, your partner, your kids, like whoever that is, it's kind of like obvious that they can't take responsibility for the way that they are. It's like a blindness. There's a blindness there. So if a narcissistic person was to move towards healing, they would actually have to change their beliefs about the world, about the hostility of the world. They'd have to build up their self-worth, and they'd have to move towards practices of intimacy. So that would be kind of ultimately how to heal narcissism, which actually is possible. And obviously people are waking up. It would take a huge amount of unconditional love to do that for a person. And you would have to look at that. If you were unconditionally giving and you were unconditionally giving, would that be coming from a place of self-love for you or from a place of self-hatred? So ultimately, if a narcissistic person started to move towards practices that would increase their intimacy with others, this would lead to connection, and it would lead to respect and affinity with others, which ultimately would lead to caring for others. So being in a relationship with a narcissistic person, it feels very clear that they just don't care. That's kind of the message that people get. So a narcissistic person would have to see reality as infinitely abundant, as opposed to there being a fundamental state of lack. So you can kind of see that codependence and narcissism are both coming from a place of not enoughness. So to sort of like rewind all the way back to kind of look at where this came from, this comes from a parenting style, like everything does, unfortunately. So a narcissistic person basically comes from a childhood where they're being parented by a parent who is kind of in a bit of a fantasy world. So they're kind of delusional in the way that they need things to be an extreme certain way that this child cannot line up with. So they can't conform to what this parent needs them to be. So this child is kind of looking at this parent or parents, and they cannot work out how to please this parent. So this might be ringing bells in people's heads. Like, this is the same for the codependent as well. So there's probably people listening to this thinking, oh my God, I'm a narcissist. But actually, it's the same thing. We just make different choices which lead to different outcomes. So the narcissism comes from, in childhood, this child cannot please this parent. They then become kind of the problem child, and then they're treated as willful or difficult. And parent will be in resistance to the child. They'll start to resist the child, they'll punish them, they'll see them as a threat. And the whole environment will be very hostile, emotionally, sometimes physically. And that child learns to not trust adults, and they feel unwanted, they feel unloved, and it's so painful that they close down emotionally, and they start to sort of project onto the world, the external world, that it is the same. It's kind of without warmth, it's without love, it's basically unsafe. They lose hope that they're lovable, and then shame and distrust and neediness kind of becomes their set point, and then they choose to go on a mission to feel good. And this is a choice. It always comes back to a decision point. What happens to us? There's a choice point here where they choose to be selfish because it's the only way that they can seem to get love. But actually they can't get love. They're stuck not being able to receive love. And I sometimes kind of refer to these kind of people as bottomless. It's kind of like if you're in a relationship with somebody narcissistic, it feels like however much you give, it doesn't seem to land. It just goes kind of straight through them. So these people, as a result of this extremely difficult childhood, they can't get the love, so they're stuck taking. And they really genuinely feel like they don't deserve love. And they have to manipulate to get what they need, which is the same as the codependence as well. The difference between the codependents is that they make a choice to self-sacrifice. They shut themselves down in a completely different way. They shut themselves down, and actually they manipulate to get their needs met as well. But they do it in a very sort of round the houses way. And then they become depleted themselves, just like the narcissistic person becomes depleted, but kind of in different ways. So narcissistic people have the most painful lives ever. And sometimes they come across as very charming. People can be very easily deceived by people that are in these patterns. But they are coming from a place of deep shame and extreme trauma. And it's very, very sad. And most people never come back from this, to be honest. It's very, very painful. So most narcissistic parents will have either narcissistic children or selfless, self-sacrificing kind of codependent children. So we all go either this way or this way. So as these people are kind of having a very large game of pretend with themselves and everybody else, they sometimes come across as having high levels of self-esteem and pride. But this is an illusion, and it's not the case at all. It's totally the opposite. They have no pride in themselves at all, and their sense of self-esteem and self-worth is terrible. So if we find ourselves in our life in situations where we have attracted narcissistic people, or we are attracting them still, like these people that we're attracting, we had parents who were self-centered in some way. And there's loads of different versions of this. And it felt like they constantly took from us instead of giving. And it might have felt like we were actually an extension of that parent. So we weren't actually seen as a separate person in our own right. We were kind of expected to be that parent, be like them instead of being like ourselves. So we kind of feel like we're not treated like an individual. We're not seen and valued for who we actually are. We actually attract narcissistic people to subconsciously attempt to solve the original trauma. And it sounds mad because it's like, well, I didn't think I was doing that, but we do. The law of attraction brings us people with the exact same wound, but kind of in an inverted way. So what we're really doing when we keep manifesting the same type of guy or the same type of girl, we're kind of saying to ourselves, right, so if we can get this selfish person that feels like mum felt or feels like dad felt, if we can get them to love us, then we've conquered the trauma of feeling unlovable. And then we can feel like mum and dad did love us. If we can get someone like them to love us, then we must be lovable. So this is what we're doing. If we can't get this narcissistic person who feels similar to mum or similar to dad, if we can't get them to love us, then this must mean that mum and dad were right that we're unlovable, because we ultimately get the message that we are unlovable. So we're all in a bit of a pickle, really. And it's horrendous being involved with somebody who is a narcissistic person and they're stuck in this kind of maladaptive strategy, because there's nothing that we can really do to please them. We're never going to please them. What can go a long way is to start to see them with compassion and to start to see them as a frightened child. So the pain that's caused by being involved with a narcissistic person is because we personalize the pain. Now, they're going to treat anyone like that, not just you. So your kind of not enoughness when you're in the presence of that person, that feels like it's got something to do with you personally. It hasn't. It's going to be the same whoever that person is with. So I've got I've got a list of things here that can help you see if there is a person in your life that has this maladaptive relational style. So ask yourself a question: is there a narcissist in my life? So one of the sort of most obvious ways to look at this, and like this is the way that I sort of explained it to my daughter as well, to help her understand whether she was in a healthy relationship with friends or whether she was in an unhealthy relationship. Reciprocity. So is there a sense of equal give and take in that relationship? That's like a really good broad one. Like, how does it feel? Are you the giver and they're the taker? Is it equal? Could there be some things that you could address that could balance that out? And so another one is when you're with this person, when you're in their presence, can you be yourself? So basically, are you shutting yourself down for that other person somehow? Are you able to shine your light in your own right? Or are there reasons why you can't do that around that person? Maybe there's a feeling of unsafety to do that. So also, there's a lot going on with feelings, like the honesty about feelings and the expression of feelings. So are you able to share in a vulnerable way? Are you able to share your feelings with that person? So can you trust them with your feelings? So often when people are in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, they're actually experiencing that they're having their feelings used against them. Now that's not a good sign. That's a red flag. So if you're having your feelings used against you, that's a sign that you can't actually trust them with your feelings. And like that's where the kind of like gaslighting comes in. Often when you're with a narcissistic person, you find that actually you're forced into a situation where you have to feel what they say you should feel, or what you're experiencing in your reality is what they say you're experiencing. So that's an interesting one. So this is another interesting one. So do they give you empathy and understanding? Do you get a sense that they can see into you with intimacy? Is it empathy or is it sympathy? So if somebody is giving you sympathy as opposed to empathy, it could be that that's making you feel less than. Whereas empathy is like a feeling of with. This person is with me. They get me. they're identifying with me, they're feeling with me. But if there's sympathy, and it's not always the case, but if there's sympathy being given by this person, it might be a strategy to get you to feel less than them. So that's interesting. I hadn't kind of seen it put that way before. So another good question is, do you feel good about yourself in their presence? So do they bring out your good side? Do they bring out the best in you? Or do you just have a sense of, I'm not actually feeling myself at all. I don't feel good about myself. I'm being made to feel bad about myself even. So do you get to be your true self? Especially when you look at like the ebbs and flows of life. So in good times, in bad times, look at both of those aspects. In good times and bad times, do you get to be your true self? Can you be you? Do you have you-ness around them? And then obviously, like all relationships have issues, whether it's a healthy relationship or a dysfunctional one. So when there's issues, can they take responsibility for their own behavior? Can they be held accountable? Because often when you're in some sort of relationship with somebody who's not narcissistic, they find it impossible to accept criticism. And criticism is not always a bad thing. Like it's how you go about it, isn't it? If somebody can't accept criticism, then you have to kind of go to the place of, well, why is that? What is so wrong with being criticized? Because who is it on this planet that never makes mistakes and never gets anything wrong? And sort of, it's hard to receive criticism, but you know, we all need to receive constructive feedback because we can improve ourselves and we can expand from that place. So it's a really good thing to look at, you know, when there's issues, when there's ups and downs, like can they take responsibility for their own behavior or is there deflection? So deflection is a strategy where I kind of call it, you know, ping pong. It's when if you try to hold someone accountable for something and they cannot let that in. And instead of like feeling into that and asking themselves the question, you know, basically questioning themselves, if they can't question themselves, that's a big flag waving as well. So can you have, right, this is a really important one. I think this is probably like one of the most poignant ones of all. Like, can you have your boundaries with them? So when you're present with them, when you're in your life with these people. So boundaries are sometimes misunderstood. So your boundaries are basically your needs, your wants, your preferences, your free will choices, the things about you that makes you you. So your unique choices, loves, likes, you know, preferences is a good way to look at it. So can you have that around them? Or do you feel like you lose them if you have this person? And also there's kind of like the really obvious one. Do you feel cared for? Does it feel like they care about you as a person rather than caring about what you do in terms of like what you do for them, but also what you do in terms of your accomplishments? Like, do they kind of live through you? Because there's a kind of like vampiric energy to people that are narcissistic because they're starving. So they will be feeding off you somehow, which is kind of not a nice way to put it. But we have to keep coming back to the place of compassion in order to understand what's really happening. So yeah, is there a sense of like, do you feel valued? Do you feel cared for? Are you being exploited or are you being valued for what you're bringing to the relationship? So boundaries are key. I think it's kind of what we're all trying to do on the healing path. If you can be really sure about your boundaries, you basically are knowing yourself. And, you know, it's taking the majority of us, you know, our 30s, 40s, 50s, like, to actually know who we are. And on the healing path, we do figure out who we are progressively more and more. So once we've established our boundaries for ourselves, we know who we are. Then we can start to make them deal breakers in relationships. And these boundaries that make us who we are actually the way that we can keep ourselves safe in relationship. Because if we can manifest somebody who allows us to have our boundaries, we can be safe to be ourselves when we're with that person, then you know that you're in a fully functioning relationship where you can grow together. And like, you know, some of us might be looking for perfection, but we're never going to find it. And no one's perfect. And there's always going to be certain behaviors that we have that are narcissistic. And we all have a narcissistic person within us. And we're all healing from that on some level. But if you can keep your boundaries really solid and you can value who you are, then you're going to become more and more resistant to being diminished. So it's about claiming our boundaries, claiming our own existence. So we want to feel like we exist as us, that we're not just existing for someone else, and that we're not existing in the way that other people deem fit. We want to exist in the way that we choose, because this game of life is, after all, it's all about free will. So that there's a lot here, there's loads, and it's such a huge topic. There's loads more that I could kind of go into, which I probably won't today, but it's so difficult being in a relationship with a narcissistic person, because what comes with that territory is this bottomlessness and like a sense of whatever I do, I'm never going to please them. And then this depletion, obviously, when you're giving, it's basic maths that you're going to end up with nothing left. There's also an element of like the gaslighting. There's a lot of illusion created because they have to create illusion to survive. They haven't got any other way. So it can feel like there's a lot of mind games. You know, I like to call it head fuckery. Excuse my language. But yeah, there's a lot of pretend. There's a lot of illusion. And the deflection that's one of the things that has driven me mad, like with people like this. When someone is deflecting you, when you're asking for your needs to be met, or you're asking for a conversation about something that you think they need to be accountable for, it's just that feeling of not being heard and never being acknowledged, and like you don't matter. But deflection is always coming from a place of deep shame. It just doesn't seem that way. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like all these things. So, I mean, I've made the mistake of trying to get narcissistic people to heal. It's never going to happen. And I'm not saying that narcissistic people can't heal. They absolutely can if it's coming from them. So if they're waking up and they're starting to see themselves, and they're starting to take responsibility for themselves, and they're starting to feel empathy, they're starting to feel upset by the impact that they're having on other people, it has to come from them for it to work. If you're projecting onto somebody else, you know, you need to heal from this, it's not going to happen, because if they're not generating that themselves, they're not going to have the capacity to even see themselves as narcissistic, because in their eyes, having something to heal would make them the bad guy, and they cannot be made the bad guy under any circumstances. So all you can really do if you're in a relationship with somebody that you suspect is narcissistic is to focus on your boundaries and to focus on your own healing. That's all you can do. You can't make another person do what you want them to do, because in some ways you'd be just like them. Although it doesn't feel that way when you're kind of stuck in that. So narcissistic people, they need supply. So if you start to withdraw from them and you start to focus on yourself and your own boundaries, they will notice. And it's likely, because they need the supply from you to survive, it's likely that they will go and get that from someone else or somewhere else. And it's a really, really difficult journey. And we all deserve people in our life that have the capacity for reciprocation and for love and for intimacy. And life is too short to be trying to heal somebody who is narcissistic, who is never going to hear you. I mean, obviously, compassion is the order of the day, and seeing where all of this has come from and then depersonalizing it, like extracting yourself from I'm not good enough for this person, and that must mean that there's something defective about me. There's something wrong and bad and broken about me. That just isn't the case. Like, there is always going to be somebody out there who will love you for who you are, always. And the way that you're going to find them is by focusing on your boundaries, establishing your existence in the world on this planet as you. And then from that space, you can meet your own needs. And then you will attract people who can meet your needs and you can meet theirs in terms of love and connection and intimacy and reciprocation and all of that. So rehabilitation is totally possible for a narcissistic person. And I'm not saying, you know, if you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, you have to make them the bad guy or you have to withdraw from them. You don't. Like, working at it is a good idea. Saying what you want out loud in a direct way and what you're perceiving is a good idea, because it's a spectrum and we're all on this spectrum somewhere. So the person in your life that might have narcissistic tendencies, they might not be fully all the way over on that side. They might just have certain things about them that are very difficult for you, that they might be able to hear you on some level. But often it's not the case, and you'll be wasting your time, quite honestly and truthfully. So the only thing that can heal narcissism is unconditional love. And I think I said this before, you know, would it be self-loving for you to give unconditional love to a narcissistic person to help them heal and to help them see that there is abundance in the world as opposed to lack? Or would it be extreme self-sacrifice on your part and almost kind of self-hating? So I think the main message for anybody facing these kind of situations is to meet your own needs and wants and learn to love yourself, and try to sort of like really firm up your beliefs about self-love and selfishness and what the difference is. I've noticed from doing sessions that parents have this problem. You know, parents are kind of by design, in a way, kind of self-sacrificing, and they'll kind of give up everything to give to their kids, sometimes to the level of depletion. And you can't care for your kids from a place of depletion. It never works. And it's like whenever you get on a plane, they'll say, you know, you need to put on your own oxygen mask before your kids, because who's going to help them if you can't breathe? And this is exactly it. We have to fill ourselves up. And we need to actually just give up expecting reciprocation from a person who just can't do that. So we have to look at narcissistic people as having an incapacity. They are starving. They're a starving child. And we can have compassion for them. But if we were expecting reciprocation from a person who doesn't have the capacity, then that would just be futile, really. So try not to take it personally. don't expect to be able to please them, because no one is ever going to be enough for them. It's not all personal to you. It is a bottomless thing. And it wasn't you that caused it. You know, they were that way before they met you. So often, like when we're in some sort of relationship with narcissistic people, we will have the feeling of being used or being invisible, and particularly being unloved and unseen and unacknowledged. So these are the wounds that are being mirrored to you by these people. So the best thing to do is see relationships as therapy. This is what I've started to do. Whoever it is that you've attracted are reflecting to you the wounds. So how are they making you feel? They're making you feel used. They're making you feel invisible. So there's a small fragmented aspect of you, probably a small child, that felt invisible, that probably felt used, that probably felt non-existent or unlovable. Those are the aspects of your consciousness that you need to spend time with and to witness and to observe in order to change your point of attraction, so you can start to bring in the people into your lives that are going to help you thrive instead of being in survival mode. So all of this being mirrored to you, it was all present in you before you attracted this person. So depersonalization is for sure like the way to go. So I think I'm gonna stop talking. Would anybody else like to say anything or to share?
I'd just like to say that was incredibly comprehensive.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Yeah, and made me look at my life from various angles of both being the narcissist, that needs the constant supply, and then also times where I've been the, codependent overgiver. And actually, there's even been a couple of examples where I've been both in the same relationship at different times.
Yeah.
In the mirror with that person.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, same here actually. And it is really interesting because I think most people who are codependent and recognize that they see the narcissist as other, that's the other side of the coin. But like, yeah, depending on the circumstances, and life does go up and it does go down, we're going to be both, and we just are. And like, we need to move away from either or consciousness. Like, usually we'll pick a lane and we'll be like, yeah, I'm over here and they're over there. But like, we need to drop into and consciousness, like this and this. Like, we are all the light and we are all the dark. And that's just how it is. And we have to see it all. We have to see it all. We have to accept it all, which is hard. It's really hard. But yeah, it's interesting you said that, Tim, because I was thinking that myself. There's been times in relationships with my parents and with my sisters and with men as well, where I've definitely been narcissistic and I've definitely been codependent, on the giving and the taking side of things, sometimes in the same relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, when you said about the need for constant supply, I think that's, for many of us, because of the type of wounds that we carry, like that's one of the most traumatic things, where we try and give and we try and compensate all the time because of that wound, that hole inside us. And when we get into that space, when we're on that side of the equation, the narcissist in that instance will go elsewhere to get their supply, because it's a hole, it's a bottomless pit, like you say, it never gets filled.
Yeah.
And that then triggers the codependent, one that's more attached in that way, into re-experiencing that original trauma of rejection and isolation and disapproval, all those other things. Then I know for sure that when I've been more the narcissist, I've done I've done that. I've had that effect on people, caused them a load of reactivation of their childhood trauma, of not being enough, and like being used, you know, and like betrayed. All of this.
Yeah. It's a horror show, isn't it? It's so hard.
Yeah.
And really uncomfortable. Like really. I think this has probably made people feel really uncomfortable. But this path of truth it really is uncomfortable, isn't it? And we just have to be it all. We have to realize that we are it all. And like, you know, denial is okay. It's like part of the path. But we can't stay there and expect to be happy. For sure. Yeah. And like extreme discomfort and like realization that you've been a certain way with people that makes you not like it about yourself, you know, that it's just emotion like all the rest of it. And like if we see emotion as temporary experiences that we are ultimately designed for us to move through, then they don't get stuck. Like emotion and discomfort of any kind was never meant to get stuck. It wasn't supposed to happen. You know, we were supposed to see emotion as nature and to see it as information. If we sit with an emotion, if we let it exist, if we experience it without trying to change it and we just let it be there, we receive so much information about what we didn't know that we didn't know. And that's all that emotion is. So all of this discomfort that this is churned up for everybody, wouldn't you rather know? Because it's leading you to a better place and it's ultimately leading you to better relationships. And relationships are life. They are what life is, you know.
I just wanted to add there, I completely agree. Relationships are the way. That's how we learn, really, most of the time. Usually through great difficulty. Sometimes, well, not all the time, right? But there's a really important thing in here as well about karma, you know, and like you reap what you sow. And like we go through these repeated patterns with different people. And like it's like how many times do we need a lesson before we learn, you know? And all that we do to others, conscious or not, usually unconscious, you know, will come back. It comes back to us at some point because the universe, everything in it, is constantly equalizing and balancing out. So once you start to see these patterns and these repeat things happening, you know, it's like you get to a point where you only want good for other people and for yourself. And when you get to that point, you realize how much you have to focus on your own healing and well-being and self-love, like you said at the beginning, because then you're accruing positive karma, right? But it takes a lot to get to that point.
Yeah, it does. And like so many people have given up on relationships. And like I even quite recently, I've been in that space where it's like, I don't know if my standards are too high to manifest anybody that is going to be a match for me. Because I know so much about relationships now, like no one stands a chance. And you know, it's kind of like I just think that each relationship you have will give you a different flavor of the same thing. So ultimately your wounds are the same, but there's lots of different aspects. It's not just one thing. So you might feel like you've healed and resolved one aspect of attracting narcissistic people, and then you'll attract a new person, and then it seems like, oh my God, they're just the same as that other person. But if you look at the energy, it's not going to be the same. Because you have healed, like you have healed the very specific aspect that last person brought you. But this person is a new message. And everyone's multidimensional. And even with, you know, when I think about the most narcissistic people that I've had in my life, like even those people did bring me joy and pleasure and love in some respects. So it's about letting go of perfectionism, I think, and just keeping on going. and seeing it as an adventure. Oh, I don't know. But yeah, anybody else want to share or say anything?
Excuse me, I'll come in. I'd just like to say that it's yeah, I find it quite refreshing to hear people say that they've experienced both aspects, you know, of codependency and narcissism within themselves. Because I think we live in a very black and white world sometimes, you know, and certainly a lot of the stuff I've seen online, it's either being one or the other.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of blame and finger pointing and victimization and being in position of victim and having been it's isn't narcissism as well part of the normal part of human development? Don't we all go through it at the age of 2? You know, the terrible twos, the tantrums that most of us have when we're age 2, when we come to the realization point that we're actually separate beings from our mothers.
Yeah.
But you know, if we're traumatized as well at that age, then it's going to be very difficult for us to move on from it. And I really think that narcissism, it's like anything else, it's part of the human condition. It is within us all, and it can be triggered in different circumstances.
Yeah.
You know, according to our own wounds, really. But I have also heard and read that, you know, anyone who isn't prepared to look at themselves like you've already described, Jenny, you know, and embark on their own healing journey is perhaps stuck in narcissistic attitudes and behaviours.
Yeah.
I don't know, and
it is really.
I tend to look at things in terms of microcosm and macrocosm as well. I think, you know, there's a lot of it about in the world, and there's also the danger of, you know, it's a fashionable label today, isn't it? And mindful of fashionable labels. It's a bit like, you know, back in the 90s and early noughties when celebs started coming out as being sex addicts or whatever addicts, you know, and that was becoming more public. It became eventually part of ordinary everyday language. You know, you'd hear people flippantly say things like, oh, I'm addicted to chocolate, or I'm addicted to shopping, or whatever, you know, and when in actual fact, they might have had a serious problem with it, because addiction, again, like, I heard you say a couple of times, you described it as a bottomless pit, and I've heard that said in addiction circles as well. Addiction is a bottomless pit. You know, it's the disease of never enough. Having this huge, empty, vacuous space inside that can't be filled, but we're trying to fill it with something outside of ourselves. Yeah. You know? So I think that there are parallels between addiction and addictive behaviour and narcissism and narcissistic behaviour. And I hold my hand up, you know, I totally identify with both narcissistic behaviour in myself sometimes and definitely addictive behaviour and codependency as well, because you know, it's evident in the jobs that I've chosen and relationships and things. Well, that, you know, I've been a caregiver and given too much to the point where I've just become an empty vessel. But in the process of all of that, I've actually been seeking to fill myself, you know, filling myself with someone else rather than, my interests and things. But, you know, there have been times where I've felt very healthy and I've been pursuing my own interests and things and done very well at those. And then it's usually when some relationship comes along that's triggered an old wound, you know, and I get distracted. Before too long, everything goes pear-shaped and I'm back on my knees again, you know?
Yeah.
So it goes. Yeah, being on the healing path, very, very interesting and extremely complex. in my experience anyway.
God, it really is. So is, isn't it? And it just feels it's never ending. And like we just all get so tired, and it seems like we're never going to get there, kind of thing. But thanks, Joyce. You said so many interesting things there. And I think the thing about like the black and white world, like you know, it's either this or it's that. I think like that's what's responsible for kind of, you know, like the very woke world that we're kind of looking out at, where everybody needs to be seen as virtuous, or, you know, some people on the spiritual path go that way, and it's kind of like, I think it's a stage of development that you have to move through, and it's like, if I can be seen to be doing this, then I'll be seen as good or right or virtuous or whatever. And it's kind of like we're just you know, if we're doing that, we're just skipping over the dark. And you cannot expand from that place. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is why we have to be both. We have to own it all. We have to be the light. We have to be the dark. And then the more of that we can own and go, yeah, that's me. And that came from this place, you know, and it wasn't my fault. And I'm doing the best I can. And at least I can see it. I can see it, and I can witness it, and I can observe it, and I can just let it be there without needing to change it. Because like when we need to hide all this stuff, we're hiding it from ourselves, we're hiding it from other people. It's so much hard work, and it's just bullshit, and it's a game of pretend, and like, who wants that? Do you know what I mean? Like, you can only expand from a place of, and I'm this and I'm that, you know, and then you're not kind of like playing I win, you lose, you know, I'm better than you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yep, I'm broken, you're broken. Like, let's grow together. Do you know what I mean? From there, um, from that place of honesty, yeah. Yes, please.
We're all trying to get to the same destination, and yeah, and help each other along the way, really, and that's becoming better as people and human beings, and
yeah,
and yeah, there was something else that came to me as well in what you were talking about. What was it now? Oh yeah, about regarding codependency, how yeah, we've sort of been steered to becoming completely selfless. I was remembering, I think it was in the Blairite years, you know, where one of the fashionable, or one of the phrases that became a fashionable slogan was above and beyond the call of duty, you know, and people are given awards and medals for really, you know, putting themselves out and running themselves ragged, you know, to care for somebody else or for some other cause, you know, which is, yeah, on the one hand, it is admirable, but if you're doing it to the detriment of your own well-being, then it, you know, it's not, is it? It's harmful. It's more abusive in a way.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking of employers as well. You know, they want somebody who's going to bend over backwards and do everything perfectly and put in the extra hours and be at the phone 24/7, and you know, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, that's the nature of the matrix world that we live in, anyway.
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I mean,
which I think as well, you know, in terms of the macroeconomic aspect, is narcissistic and needs codependent public in order to thrive. You know, it constantly takes.
Yeah.
In many, many ways, and gaslights in many, many ways, you know. So
yeah,
they're the people that are running the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to finish.
Narcissism, like you said, Jenny, narcissism needs codependence in order to thrive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and effectively it's really about growing up and learning to grow up. You know, I tend to see them as the narcissistic parents, if you will. You know, the controllers, the gaslighters, the punishers, We were like the naughty kids, misbehaving kids that are being punished and kept in the dark about things. And yeah, we need to sort of separate from them and learn to stand on our own 2 feet and grow up, you know, and hopefully help each other in the process.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
It's very challenging. Anyway, I'll shut up now because I don't want to dominate the
we're definitely learning to grow up, because we're like, healing is like on a very basic level, like reparenting. We're reparenting ourselves. So yeah, we are growing up. That made me laugh what you said about was it Tony Blair, did you say? Like actually getting people to compete, you know, by self-sacrificing. Who's the best self-sacrificer? I mean, that's insane, isn't it? That's crazy.
And you give them medals and awards for it as well, you know.
That's so bonkers, isn't it? Oh dear.
Yeah.
And that's a shame to see that.
Sorry, Tim. Just let me say this. It kind of reinforces what you were saying as well about how, you know, value is placed on what people do rather than who they are.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much in there that is like just Luciferian consciousness, isn't it? It's terrible. Oh, where do you start with it? What did you want to say, Tim?
Oh, we're talking about it. Sorry, Tim wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you, Joyce. I just wanted to, you know, clap my hands really at that, because you know, to talk about it on the everyday life level for individuals, and then when you're looking at the systems of the world, you know, and the people that are running the show and have the control, completely agreeing that to have that kind of visibility that we are living within this beast narcissist system, which, you know, has to have that constant supply, and we are the batteries, and it's there mostly to just drain us until we're spent, you know. And it's the same as being very, very similar to as being in a you know, a narcissistic relationship, just two people. And once you start to see that, I think that's where you go into a whole new level of work on yourself to untangle yourself from that system sufficiently, and then be able to use the system to actually empower yourself and others. And that's really where life starts to change. But it's a massive undertaking because we're all born into it, and it's so hard to, you know, separate your consciousness and not untangle yourself from it. But I love what you said. It was just bang on. I'm so glad that's been in this conversation.
It's been imposed upon us, hasn't it, by these so-called leaders that supposedly set an example. Yeah, and trickle down effect through its workplace and then brought home. And, yeah, very challenging. Anybody else got anything to say? It'd be great to hear other people's takes on it as well.
And you don't have to join in. This bit always reminds me of being the kid at the back of the class, like trying to be invisible. But yeah, like the governments are basically our parents, aren't they? If you look at it, you know, do as you're told, and that's what we're doing. Yeah, external, internal. But
we have a choice. We do have a choice.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do, and I love that. Yeah, and that, I think ultimately that's what it's all about. Like it's God versus Lucifer or Satan, or what, you know, good versus evil, or whatever way that you want to look at it. It's basically free will versus determinism, isn't it? Like it's choose, or choose to be someone else. Like choose yourself, or choose to be someone else, or choose to do what someone else says, or be someone else, or I think that's it. It's like be with yourself or be taken away from yourself. That's what's happening kind of on a very basic level.
Yeah, and that all brings in what you were saying about boundaries, you know, knowing what your boundaries are when your emotional, psychological and physical boundaries are being violated, you know, when to stand up and say, no, enough's enough, you know, I'm not standing for this anymore, you know.
Yeah.
But also learning to be assertive, you know, how to put these things across in an assertive way rather than aggressive, manipulative or passive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just massive to learn. And it all takes practice. You know, I'm still learning myself. You know, it's
Yeah.
I fall short still many times, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep getting up and trying.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's loads of ways of you know, kind of dealing with narcissism. I mean, like I know Tim's familiar with this one. Like there's a I don't know what you would call it really, like a strategy called grey rock, I think it's called grey rocking. Like if
That's right.
yeah, I first heard about that when a friend of mine, she was in a domestic abuse situation with somebody she was co-parenting with, so the father of her child. And she wasn't together with him. They were living separately, but the child was moving from one house to the other. And he would get her in all sorts of really difficult scenarios. And she learned about the grey rock process. And she was finding that it really worked. And like it's really good for people who are stuck in having to be in a relationship with somebody that they would normally have just completely withdrawn from and removed themselves from. So when you're co-parenting, obviously that's a good example of that circumstance. But what she did, I think she was taught by a therapist to be a grey rock. So basically, when he was trying to get his supply, or he was trying to manipulate, or he's trying to have things his way, he wasn't able to access her or have an affinity with her. So she basically became a grey rock. So totally avoiding eye contact. So she would just look down. Her responses to any questions would just be yes or no. And she wouldn't make conversation. She wouldn't give him anything that he could use as ammunition that he could twist or and like obviously it's not ideal and it can only really work if you're having to be in a relationship with a person that you can't really escape from. But I can see how it can keep people safe in some circumstances. And I kind of like, in some ways, sort of, if you look at the macrocosm, like with the governments and all of that, like a lot of the do not comply campaigns and what have you, like just being invisible and just not responding, you know, to the threats of this, that, or the other, or whatever, is, I think, very valid and kind of one of the most powerful ways to deal with them. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but yeah, being a grey rock, just being, okay, well, I'm stepping out of this system, so I'm just going to be invisible now. You carry on over there, I'm just going over here.
Like not voting, for example, which I didn't do, and I'm proud to say so this time.
Yeah, I didn't either. I wasn't even sure where my polling card got sent, to be honest, even if I wanted to like track it down, but yeah, I just
in order to stop the game, you've got to drop the ball. So
yeah, I did think about spoiling a vote or like, you know, voting for reform or something like that. But I just thought if I vote, then I'm taking part in a system that I know is insane. Like I don't want to really participate, thanks. So, you know, it's just how it is.
Instead of uniparty cocking up oligarchy and corporatocracy, right?
Yeah.
One snake, many heads. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Oh, dear. Yeah, so what a brilliant conversation. I love it. And I wonder what I'll be talking about next week.
what you were saying about grey rocking as well, you know, about your friend who was just not making eye contact and only giving yes or no answers to questions and not giving any more ammunition. And you said about it, you know, helping to make someone feel safe. I think it help you to make you feel safer, but not just that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not going to be painful.
No.
It's still very painful, isn't it? I mean, because I know for myself, I don't like ignoring someone, or cutting someone off, but sometimes I have to,
Yeah.
in order to protect myself. But it's not a comfortable position to be in.
No.
It's not the idea. It's not the way that I would necessarily like to deal with things. But
yeah,
I have situations where I've had to do that.
Yeah, and same here. And it's very taboo, isn't it? It's a very taboo subject where, you know, a lot of people don't think it's okay to cut yourself off from someone, especially if it's someone in your own family. You know, that's very taboo. But sometimes you just, if you're not going to, if you're dealing with a person who does not have the capacity to engage with you in a way that can help you thrive, then you have to keep yourself safe. Like it's, you know, it might be difficult and it might be uncomfortable to do that, but that has to be better. It has to be, if that's the only way that you can honor yourself and protect your boundaries and to exist, actually, if that's the only way that you can exist as you, then that has to be the way forward. And you know, I've got that situation in my life now. There's people that I've had to withdraw from that are in my family, and I do have a lot of people judge me for that, which I did find hard, but now I don't. I don't give a shit now. But yeah, it's kind of like, if you have to keep yourself safe, you have to keep yourself safe, and that's all there is to it. And other people looking in on your situation, they can't know what you're experiencing. They can't understand your perspective. They can only understand it from their perspective, which is not the same family. You know, it's not the same experience at all. But yeah,
you always get the onlookers and you know, an audience and people judge. You know, I mean, again, that's another part of the culture that we live in. With, I'm just thinking of soap operas on TV. You know.
Yeah.
And I often wonder if people turn to soap operas on TV because it's a major distraction from their own stuff that's going on within themselves, because they don't look at that. You know, it's painful to look at our own stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, look at that. I think that's why soap operas and TV dramas are so popular.
Yeah.
You know, because it's all there in the world of entertainment.
It is. It is a
distraction and avoidance of looking at your own stuff. But having said that, you can also watch them and learn from them, you know, and get identification from them as well. So they can aid in some respect, to an extent, I think, to a degree sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said that soap operas are part of the agenda as well, because they're so low frequency and it's all I win, you lose, isn't it? And it's all, you know, get out of my pub, and just kind of conflicts and
it becomes normalized. It's part of the normalization process, isn't it?
Oh my God. Yeah.
If you're looking at these things every day, then
totally.
You know, it's part of the psychological conditioning and processing, programming.
That's so true. Yeah. So much has been normalized, and it stops people from seeing the dysfunction. You know, it really does. And like also in a sort of very similar vein, you know, like celebrity mags and like gossip columns and stuff like that. Like I've got friends who like love that stuff, and I kind of look at them and think, how are they a match to that? And I think that it's that when they see this gossip about this person's done this or they've been exposed for doing that or whatever, that it gives them some sort of sense of I'm better than that celebrity because I would never stoop to those lows or whatever. And it's kind of like a bit of a boost. It's like, I don't know, it's really interesting to me. I find it so interesting.
I think we've touched on a number of topics tonight that you could probably do a series of radio shows.
Yeah, no, I love the tangents. I love where it goes. Yeah. But anyway, I think I might wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm just here listening. It's nice to have that interaction and sit here and listen to it rather than be the interaction.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the conversation. It's great. It's absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thanks for your presence, Andy. You don't have to join in. And like, you know, I love that people are here listening live. It's great. And yeah, I'm really enjoying doing this. And you know, it's lovely to be doing something new that I'm really enjoying. And like I was saying to Andy before we started recording, committing to doing this every week is like really healing for me because of my traumas and like stuff that I'm still working on, like I do have difficulty sometimes committing to things. So committing to this every week is like really good for me and I'm really enjoying it. And like I think when you move in the direction of something that you find hard, it's very expansive, you know. And I don't find it hard as in like hard to know what to say because I do talk a lot and I don't find it hard to talk a lot. But commitment is something that I'm finding sort of quite hard in my life and also committing to myself. So yeah, this is like really healing for me and it's a win-win. So I'm always looking for win-wins. Like if I can do something that helps me that also helps other people, then that's what I want to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really lovely to hear, Jen. Thanks.
Oh, cheers. So, yeah, and it's good actually that we've got the opportunity to go over a bit because Dolly's not on anymore, is she, at 7? So there's not a big rush. So that's really good.
No, that unfortunately is the case, or fortunately, depending on which perspective you come from.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dolly's gone on to bigger and better, shinier things.
Oh, good.
So yeah, there's no pressure to finish the show, or I mean, you can always stop the recording, Jenny, and continue like with an after show chat that isn't part of the recorded show.
Yeah.
But I guess that's entirely up to you. That's
yeah. Okay. I think I'll do that. So I'll say goodbye. Hang on a sec. And stop the recording. That's it, isn't it? I don't know why I never remember which button to press.
Stop the recording the same way you started it. It keeps the show open.
Yeah.
But it ends the recording file.
Okay. All right then. Thank you, everybody. Right, I've stopped.
That's it.
Stop
That's it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk and some people are self-conscious as well. That they know
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
speak while
Yeah. Yeah.
So